Okay, welcome to another episode of the Two Stewards Show. I'm Mark and I'm here with Brent,
Hello, everybody.
and we're going to talk about sound money today. So, Brent, we've been talking a lot about inflation and money, how it relates to real estate a little bit. And I've heard this concept of sound money, air quotes if you can't see me. What is sound money? What is the whole concept of sound money? I think we've kind of established that our current monetary system isn't great, and maybe you could even say it's not sound. But what do you make of this sound money thing?
Yeah, this is going to be a fun episode, and hopefully we don't ramble on too much in different directions, but there's a lot of things to cover here. It's a deep topic, I think. Mm-hmm. It sounds kind of, superficial to talk about money, but I think there's a real value in talking about money because it really does undergird a lot of things that happen in our modern world, in the economy, obviously, but in society. I mean, like, money is a huge part of our lives, right? And we spend a lot of our time, a lot of our waking hours actually trying to get it. So It's good that you asked the question.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
What is sound money? Well, compared to unsound money, I think we should ask the question, what is money? And I make that comment just because I think we live in a world where we don't have sound money and people don't really know that. Maybe they're kind of a little bit aware. Obviously we talked about inflation and the value of money going to zero. But do we actually have money right now? And is the currency that is in your bank account or in your wallet, is that actually money? Because we use money and currency kind of interchangeably, right? Like, I just got paid some money for this, and that's really, when you get down to the definition of money, like, it's not really what money is. And so I think we want to cover some of the best way to look at this question, I think, is to just identify what are the characteristics or properties that make for good money, right?
Yeah.
So maybe I'll just jump into this. We have a problem, and that problem is the problem of how to communicate value between people. So if you imagine like a really small civilization and only a small number of people that are really well connected to each other, you can solve that problem pretty easily through direct exchange, through barter.
Yeah.
And that, if you look through history, is definitely what usually happens, right? You have a small family or a group of families together in a village or whatever, smaller and smaller civilizations, and you can actually make an economy, local economy, based on trading goods of value. So I have something that is of some value, and I want something that you have. We do a direct exchange. And now I have what I needed from you, and you have what you needed from me. But that's a huge effort to try and manage and keep track of what's going on. And there's a lot of problems with direct exchange as a way of transferring value from one person to another. And the biggest problem, I think, is that it's not scalable, right? Like, we can't make an international or a global economy running off of something where we're trying to exchange value using goods that are not consistent. And so you run into what's called the lack of coincidence of wants. I'm just going to ramble.
Well, these are some big words there, Brent.
Yeah, hit me with anything you need to clarify. Coincidence of wants. Okay, well, wants is a pretty... Like, if you want something and I want something, but we don't have the same wants, right? There's a lack of coincidence of wants. Let me explain. So maybe you want, something from me. Let's use the example. I'm farming, I'm producing wheat. And what do? Maybe you build houses. So,
okay, sure.
Yeah, you look like a house builder.
Right.
So you build a house, and obviously you need to eat, so you want some of my wheat. Well, what can you give me? Well, you can give me a house, but how much wheat can I trade you for your house? Like, it just, you can obviously see the problem right away. Like, there's a lack of coincidence of wants because there's a scale issue, right? Like, I have all these kernels of wheat, you can only consume so many of them. So you don't want to have storehouses of wheat equal or equivalent to the value of your house sitting around, because it's going to go bad. It's going to deteriorate and decay and rot. And then that is also leading to the lack of coincidence of wants in terms of time, right? Because you don't want to eat all the wheat at once. And
I might.
Yeah, you might. But so anyways, you could see kind of the problems that come out of that kind of economic system, right? One where we're relying on direct exchange, we're bartering with each other. Mm-hmm. But that is essentially what money seeks to solve, right? That's the problem where we need a medium of exchange to go between us now. And that's one of the definitions of money, like that money is a medium of exchange, because now I use a secondary good, something else other than what you want or I want, just to go between us, to communicate the value, right? So if I have the wheat and you have the house, maybe I can take, a couple bushels of wheat and convert it to a different good, like money.
Yep.
And I can give you that money and you can take it, and it's equivalent to an even smaller fraction of what you own, which is the house. And we can interact. And now you can all of a sudden scale your economic system a lot more, right?
Well, and you can't, the main way that wealth is created is through trade. And you can't really, if you're doing a barter system, you can't really specialize, right? So you're talking about, I could be a home builder, but the home in a barter system, the type of home I could build you would be very limited.
Oh, yeah.
It's probably going to be like mud and sticks, right? Because I don't.
Through collecting the mud, you got to go make food for yourself.
Yeah, that too, but I also don't have access, right? Because if we're living in a particular area, we're limited to kind of what's around.
Yeah.
Right. So if you can happen to grow wheat, then that's perfect. But there's probably not like bananas being grown or, cucumbers or certain other things being grown in that area. And then by the same token, I can maybe get mud, make bricks and stuff, but I would not have access to more advanced things like different kinds of siding, insulation, plumbing, all these things. Right? Yeah, like what we have today. The only reason, engineered products. The only reason we have that is because of specialization, and that's one of the things I think that money solves. So now you could have somebody far away who makes insulation of some kind, and I could, I guess, go bring him wheat, but if he doesn't want wheat, if he wants cucumbers or something, then how am I supposed to trade with them? So that's like you mentioned the scalability, right? There's scalability and specialization. You just can't, you're very limited to what you can do. Even if I want to trade with another tribe or something, we have to agree on what holds value. And, wheat does, but maybe they don't like wheat.
Yeah. So that kind of paints a good picture of what the problems are with barter and direct exchange. Now, money is the solution because it's a medium of exchange. And now that's called, I guess, if barter is direct exchange, where it's direct between us, introducing money, now it's indirect exchange. So we're no longer trading what I have for what you have. We're trading it first for something else, and then indirectly I'm trading with you. And that, like you said, lends itself to the specialization and division of labor where, I can work and I can denominate my work and the products of my labor in something else that everyone else also does the same, and they denominate their labor in this good as well. And now we can use that good for trade, and that becomes this medium of exchange that goes between everybody, right? And now an economy can grow and flourish.
Yeah, because now you can have a miller. So instead of you just growing wheat and then making some rudimentary kind of paste or something with it, now you can have somebody who actually has a mill, who has specialized equipment, and his only job is to grind up wheat. That's all he does all day, right? Whereas if it was just like you and me and a few other people, we don't have time to do that because we're like busy
Yeah.
trying to grow the wheat and do all this stuff. So yeah,
So we can
money.
get into the capital accumulation too, because that mill that he has
Yep.
is actually the accumulation of capital that, like, he had to spend time making something that wasn't going to be consumed. Anyways, that's a whole nother conversation. Oh, so we talked about this medium of exchange, right? And now
Yeah.
we're using this good. So we've moved past barter, where we're exchanging things between us, and we're now we have money, and that good that we call money has to be saleable, right? Like, we have the biggest benefit of it is that we can get rid of it when we want to.
Yeah.
Right?
What do you mean by saleable?
So, like, I could sell it whenever I wanted to, right? Like, it's
Okay.
liquid. I can get, and the best money, obviously, is one that I can sell for anything that I need, right? So, like, everybody wants to buy this thing, and I can go anywhere in the world, and it's universally recognized as such. And I can sell it in smaller quantities or larger quantities. And there's a good list that I just have here. So saleability across scales, space, and time. And that kind of highlights like a good framework for identifying the characteristics that make for money,
Yeah.
right? Because if money is a medium of exchange that we use to go between us to exchange value, then we want that medium of exchange to do certain things. We want it to retain its value over time, right? We don't want it to lose value, because if I'm producing wheat and I spend all year producing wheat and I get a crop and I get my money, and then next year it's not worth what I work, like, what's the
Yep.
point of me actually holding this money, right? I'm going to go find something else that does hold its value. And the other thing is portability, right? So you obviously want something that once you get it, you can bring it anywhere, right? And it has a certain amount of value density to it, right? And
Yeah.
I don't know if this is too intense, but
I don't know. I'm pretty dense.
Gideon's nodding his head over there saying, guys, you're going over my head.
Dumb it down a little,
Well-
Einstein.
Yeah, sorry. Value density just means that like the unit that you hold in your wallet or your pocket can buy you a lot of goods with it, right? Like, I can, it's the difference between like $100 bill and a dime, right? Like, or what's the smallest one in Canada now? A nickel? You
Yeah.
don't do pennies?
Yeah.
Oh, so you see a penny and $100 bill, like, they're about the same weight, maybe. But, and they can fit in the same area, but the one is more dense, like, in terms of the value it can purchase, right? And that's a bad example because it's really not money. It's like a currency.
Yeah, but you get the point. It's
Yeah.
like having like a cow.
Yeah.
A cow is worth X amount, so it's not super dense. And if you want 10 times the amount of the value of a cow, you need to have 10 cows.
Yeah.
So now try carry like 10 cows
Around.
around and buy stuff.
So can you find a good that has more value density? And that I'm just talking about this because that's about that describes the portability,
Yeah.
or the saleability of money across space, right? So you can bring it anywhere, and you can show up in a different area of the world or a different place, or you can go to the mall and you have a purchasing power in your pocket
Yeah.
that you can carry around with you, right? And then the other thing is scales, and we kind of touched on that, just the fact that you can divide it into smaller or larger increments to be able to
Yeah.
make bigger purchases or smaller purchases, right? Like, you don't want to have money that when you want to go buy your coffee in the morning, you need like a big thing. And then when you want to buy a house, you need like wheelbarrows full of it, right?
Yeah.
So it needs to have a good, efficient way of dividing into bigger and smaller pieces for various transactions, right? Because the idea at the end of the day is that money is really just how we communicate value between us. So yeah, does that answer your question?
Yeah, a little bit.
There's a lot in there, and we can touch on a lot of different things.
Yeah, well, I think there's one more. I don't know if you touched on it, but one more aspect of the saleability, right? And saleability across time. don't know if you mentioned that. I don't think you did.
Yeah. Well, I did a little bit about. Yeah. Okay. So let's talk about that. So obviously, a very important thing when you're looking at the medium of exchange that you're going to be using to store your value or your time, whatever time you spend at work, you're going to earn some money, right? Whatever you choose to use as that money, that store of value, you want it to endure. And so it has to be durable in a certain sense, but it also has to maintain its value. And how does something maintain its value? Well, usually that comes down to the scarcity of it, right? Because if I can just produce that thing that you're holding as a store of your value, right? Now I'm devaluing what you're holding as a store of value, right? And that's called the stock to flow ratio. And I don't know if you know about
there,
that.
Genius.
Yeah. Do you want to describe the stock to flow ratio to people?
Nope, I'd rather criticize you for attempting it.
So if you have a certain amount of a good, right?
Yep.
And let's just use gold as an example here.
Yeah.
Because gold has ultimately been chosen as money throughout history, right? It has kind of been the thing that people land on, saying like, this actually doesn't rot, it doesn't decay, it doesn't devalue very quickly because it's very hard to produce, and I can divide it into smaller pieces. So it's like it's a pretty good money, right? And especially when you compare it to other things that are that do decay or that aren't as value dense, right?
Yeah.
And then the key feature there being that it's hard to produce, right? So gold is a certain rarity in the Earth's crust. It takes a certain amount of effort and skill and time and labor to actually extract it and to refine it and get it. And so by virtue of that, the amount of new gold that is produced every year is a very small fraction of the existing stockpile that we have.
It's like 2% or something, right?
Yeah. I don't know the exact number.
I think it's around there.
Yeah. So 2% every year, they make 2% more gold.
Yep.
And that's pretty reliable.
Yep. Yeah, it's been that for quite a number of years.
Like 1,000 years?
Oh, I don't know about that. I was thinking more like 100 years, but
as long as they've been tracking it, it's so if that's the case, compare that to other things that you could store your value in, right? Like if you're trying to store value in nickel or copper, right? And you might like them because they're shiny and they're great, and hey, I can trade some nickel for some stuff, and people seem to want it. Yeah, but over time, like, what is the cost of producing more nickel? And so if everybody starts valuing nickel, they could just produce a lot more of it, relatively speaking, to gold, right?
Yeah.
And the cost of production is lower, and maybe it's more plentiful. So gold is kind of being the element that is the most scarce.
Yeah.
Right, for lack of a better word. So it makes for a great store of value. When you're trying to communicate value, right, between people, you're trying to store up value first, and then maybe you're communicating smaller portions of it, right? So if I work all year and I'm trying to save up to buy a house, I don't just I need to save all that labor in something that holds its value, and then eventually in 5 years I'll have enough to be able to communicate that to someone else and say, look, I've worked for this, here's my value, I want to give it to you and get something for it. So those are kind of the properties that make for good money. And then I think you can kind of step back, maybe it's a little bit confusing, and compare these properties to our current money today, right?
Yeah, so like these are a little bit it's a little bit abstract.
Yeah.
right? Especially,
And I did that for a reason, to try and.
but I always like stories as good, or examples, right? So you're talking, and I'm thinking about some examples. So you have when we talk about scarcity in particular, where money has been corrupted or ruined. So we think of I think it was the Cook Islands, where they use stones, a particular kind of stone, and this is in Saifedean's book, The Bitcoin Standard, where he talks about
the island of Yap.
Yup, yes, that's right. Where basically these islanders had existed for many years, mining a particular. Oh, we lost our video there. I'm gonna keep talking, anyways. Mining a particular stone from an island that was far away, so it was hard to get. It was scarce, and the bigger the stone,
to extract these.
Yeah, and the bigger the stone, the more valuable. So obviously, there's a few issues because these massive stones, not very portable, but it functioned as money in their society. It was a smaller society, and they were able to transact. And a lot of the times, there's implicit trust where you had this large stone that couldn't be moved. People would just know who owned that. So they wouldn't even need to bring it to their house. It would just be this chief owns that stone. And if a transaction happened, now it would be known that this other guy owns that stone. But there's a fella from the West who came down there, discovered these islands. Well, he discovered them. They already existed, but came into the society and figured out, hey, I want resources from these islands, and they just want stone from this other island. Okay, I'll go get a whole bunch. So he took his boats over, mined a whole bunch of this particular stone, went back, flooded their economy with this stone, and they didn't realize it at first, right? But all of a sudden now it was not scarce anymore, ruined their economy.
Yeah.
Another example would be I think they're called the agri beads in West Africa. Same thing, hard to come by, glass beads. They were used by a lot of the tribes in West Africa as a form of money. And same thing, Westerners came in and said, hey, we can produce these beads for cheap. And again, flooded the economy with this money, air quotes, and ruined their economy. So money can be corrupted.
The moral of the story there is that the money was not sound, like it was in their little society, right? Because it functioned for however many years. But when you start globalizing things, you realize oh, maybe this isn't the best option to pick. We shouldn't be using glass beads or whatever to trade with because they're so plentiful over here. We could just dilute the supply and ruin everyone's lives.
And I think another lesson too is that if it is possible, people will corrupt money.
Yeah, that's that's the sinful nature tendency, especially if somebody has the power to do that, right? If you have a monopoly on violence, or a government, right? Like a king or an emperor, and they can control the military, or they can control power over people to confiscate money, and they can debase it, then they're going to.
Yeah.
Or we've seen it. It's just a human tendency to do, right?
Yeah, that's another example, right? The Roman Empire, for many years, gold and, to a lesser extent, silver and bronze were the forms of exchange, and that worked very well till they started to physically debase the coins that were out there. They started putting less gold in them, or they started shaving them down, and, eventually to the point where people didn't want to accept official currency anymore because it was worth less and less and less until it was almost worth less. So
yeah,
because gold is a great example of money, and it's been used for thousands of years as money because of all the properties that it has.
Yeah,
I mean, it is portable to a degree, not once you get into large amounts, but for a long time the world functioned on a gold standard. Right, gold was the de facto currency that everybody could trust. Yeah. And I know you mentioned silver. Which brings to mind another example. I'm getting a little bit off track here.
No, go ahead.
But we had a gold standard for a long time, and I just remember, I wasn't around then, but China went on a silver standard. They made a bet that silver would become the reserve currency of the world, and didn't happen price of silver collapsed, and that set China up for like a whole bunch of events. But this was like 1800s, right? It set China way back because they had huge amounts of silver, no gold. Everybody went on the gold standard, and just kind of ruined their economy and set in chain a motion of events that, to where China is today. So I guess, I don't know what the moral of the story is. Pick the right store of value.
To me, that you're talking, and I'm just thinking, like, that just speaks to how money is emergent, right? Mm-hmm. Like, it happens. It comes about. It's not something that you can top down enforce, right? Like, you can, but it never works, and it never happens that way. Like, we live today in a fiat world, a fiat money system, which means the money is because I said so. Like Latin fiat, is by decree.
No, I don't know, Brent.
Yeah, well,
I'm not
fiat
a Roman.
Is Latin for by decree, or basically because I said so. This is money because the governing authority says that is money. And that's a problem, right? Because if we've just identified that money is a way of communicating value, mm-hmm. and now you have that money that is naturally emergent, where people select the thing that they want to communicate value in, and that's just what happens. And you have a top-down authority saying, no, this is money. Well, now you have a bit of a conflict there, right? Mm-hmm. And it opens up the door to debasement, because if somebody has control over the money, like we just talked about, they fall prey to their own evil desires, and they want more of it, or they want to make more of it than they need to and give it to the people they want to. And in so doing, they dilute the value of everyone else's money. And usually those are the people who are working the hardest to actually make things happen in a society. And
that reminds me. That is one good example of, you said opening the door to debasement, right?
Yeah.
But that's also something I do when my kids are being really loud.
What?
I open the door to the basement and I send them down there.
See, that's because you have the monopoly on violence. Even the threat of violence coming from you.
Especially for my kids. They're smaller than me still.
Yeah, so they choose their own money. I mean, I don't even know where we're going with this.
They transact in Lego.
Dad, your threats are not valid in my world because I live on a Lego standard. So you have a list here in front, like you put it in front of us. So the St. Louis Fed. What is the St. Louis Fed?
Yeah, so I found this kind of a little bit funny. But yeah,
Well, you have to explain why it's funny, because what's the Fed?
Yeah, so it's kind of like the circus, but in suits. Is that a good description?
Yeah, like a highly educated circus.
So the Federal Reserve Bank of St. Louis. So we always talk about the Fed as if it's like this monolithic entity, but really it's not. It's a group of banks in the States, which are not, they're independent. We'll say that in air quotes as well. And they are, but they're politically appointed. The governors are politically appointed, right? So they operate in this quasi-independent thing, and really we've seen them just kind of working. The Fed, as a unit, has worked in lockstep with the federal government. Yeah. But important to remember, like the Federal Reserve Bank is separate from the federal government. That's the idea anyway. So
it's not federal, and there's no reserves.
Yeah. So when they established the Fed, they put them in a bunch of cities around the state. So one of them is St. Louis, and they all have their own websites, and they all have their own sort of take on things. But
this is the central bank of the United States, right?
Yes. Yeah. So even though they're all independent and separate, they still, central bank of the states. So if you look at
probably the most important bank in the world, or one of the most.
Yeah, I mean, next to the BIS, Bank of International Settlements, that's sort of the central bank of central banks. Would be the most important. So stlouisfed.org, they've got a list here, a podcast about money, and they talk about the different aspects of money. So I'll just list them quick, and we're not going to go through all of them right now, but we've been talking about it. So durability, And so, as I'm listening to these, think about, you've got gold, which we've used for a long time. Now we had paper money. We don't really, we still have it, but really it's digital money.
Yeah.
Right. So these are just think about the different kinds of money and how they, fit these aspects. So it's durability, portability, and they're saying these are the important things about money. If you want to have money, this is what it should be like. So durability, portability, divisibility. You have to be able to divide it into smaller units. Like you said, uniformity. So that means, if I have a $20 bill, you have a $20 bill, it's the same thing. Mm-hmm. Whereas I could have a cow and you could have a cow, but your cow could be nicer, so I might want your cow. And there's an imbalance there, right? It's not uniform. Limited supply. So that's scarcity, right? And I'll get back to that one. And then acceptability or recognizability, right? So where, like, if I give you a $20 bill for something, you see that and like that's acceptable to you because you can use that anywhere else. And
I don't need to put it on a weigh scale and see if it's. I don't need to do any technical analysis every time I do a transaction.
Or if I e-transfer you $20, like there's this implicit trust that it's
not
worth
only
$18.
Yeah. Like when I get e-transfers from Mark, they're actually worth a bit more. Okay.
But so the part that I find kind of funny is that they're listing limited supply or scarcity as a desirable aspect of money. And the Fed is kind of responsible for how much money is in the economy. I mean, the government can introduce new money into the economy via deficit, because obviously that money doesn't exist, so it has to get paid for somehow, and they're creating new money. But the Fed will do, the quantitative easing or quantitative tightening we've heard so much about, introducing the money into the system, and that's not necessarily into the hands of consumers, but it's still in the system and affects credit and all these things.
Yeah, it's the supply.
Overall supply of money. And we have seen the money supply increase drastically, ridiculously, even over the last 20 years, right? Even over the last 2 years. And I haven't looked this up in a while, but like last year, it was something like 25% of all U.S. dollars in existence were less than a year old. So that means the money supply went up by 25%.
Well, and that's the U.S. That's the world reserve currency, right? Like the
for
US dollar.
Now, yes.
Yeah, for now. Well, historically speaking, for the last recent period of history, it's been like, you got to have U.S. dollars, and everybody, that's what, kind of sets up demand for them.
Yeah. And that's a whole other topic again, right? The reserve currency and all that sort of thing. But I just thought it was interesting that they should list scarcity as one of the important aspects of what makes
because as we've
money.
Been talking, it's clearly not scarce.
No.
The way that it exists right now.
No, not at all.
And I pulled out another quote because I just thought it was interesting to comment. It says, so the nation's banking, this is on the same website, I think, the Federal Reserve. The nation's banking system is only as safe and sound as the banks within the system. So the Federal Reserve examines banks regularly to identify and contain bank risks. And I was wondering what the risks were. Like, and that kind of ties into the scarcity. And because when I think the risk of a bank, I think like a bank is a place where you store money, right? If I have a bunch of extra money kicking around, I put it in a bank and they take care of it for me. They're a custodian of my money, right?
Yeah.
But what would constitute a risk to the bank? And what jumps out at me is like, well, if they go take my money and they go lend it out to somebody and they don't have my money when I want it, or there's no, basically when I go to the bank to go get it, it's not there, right?
Yeah.
And that's like a fractional reserve problem, right?
Okay, there's another big word here, college boy. You want to explain fractional reserve banking?
Okay, well, maybe let's tie these really abstract, crazy loose ends together, because we've talked a little bit about what the history of money and like the characteristics of sound money, and this episode's gone all over the place. And now we're talking about, like, today we have the Federal Reserve and we have a fiat world. So how do we get there? I guess maybe let's talk about that, because gold, like we said, was money, and
Yeah.
it is still today. I think is largely constitutes, and it satisfies all these characteristics that even the Fed is spouting off here,
Yep.
right? So if gold's money, how do we get to fiat world? Like, how do we get to paper currency, right? Like, what happened if for thousands of years we're using monetary metals and like slowly we're getting settled on gold as the de facto money, like this is money. And then something must have happened between when everyone was using gold and it was working great to now where we have inflation and we have, money that the Federal Reserve can just print out of nothing.
Yeah.
Like, is that really money? Like what's going on there? Do you have any insight into the history of this?
A little bit. So I think we may have mentioned this before. So there's a website. I always hate mentioning the name, but like they're spot on with their analysis and just the historical analysis as well. But it's called WTF Happened in 1971. And so 1971 was the year when officially we went off of the gold standard. It really was happening long before that. So you got, I think, 1913 when the Federal Bank of the United States was introduced as a thing. And like it really, there's some more abstract ideas here, but we're talking about sort of that top-down, you talk about fiat, right? Really the identification of fiat, the introduction of fiat money, where the government says so, right? Just trust us because we say so. So Fed was established, I think, again, 1913 to help centralize money and banking and all this stuff.
So let's
It was a good
abstract
idea.
this a bit, because what actually happened there was gold has great properties for money,
Yep.
but it lacks portability, right?
Yes.
You mentioned that earlier. So, and that's a problem because, if you need to make a transaction and you're trying to, let's say US is trying to trade with China and they got to send a boat full of gold across the world to China, right?
Yep.
There's a very high transaction cost.
Yes.
It's not very efficient to just send gold around the world. So gold is portable because
Yep.
you can carry it in your pocket, but it doesn't scale like that. That portability is very lacking. It gets to a certain point where okay, it's just, I don't want to really carry this briefcase of gold halfway around the world because, I could get shot and mugged and stolen, whatever. Right. So
Yep.
maybe I have to hire somebody as security to take this right. So then, well, do I really want to make that transaction? And that's really limiting on an economy, right? Because if you're trying to have free trade and you said like trade is how things happen in this world, and we end up prospering and flourishing and growing. This is a massive hindrance on that, right? Like if you can't get gold around the world quickly, right, and it's expensive to do so, then the tendency is to centralize it, right? To put it in
Yep.
a bank and use that bank as a custodian to say, look, I have, let's say $1 million of gold, and I put it in the bank, and the bank gives me a piece of paper that says you have $1 million in gold, and whenever you want that gold, you can come here and get it.
Yep.
Right? And we promise you it's just going to be in this little safe back here. We'll take care of it. So I go do my business for 10 years and I have this little piece of paper, and then I want my gold back. And is it still there?
Yep.
Right? And this all of a sudden means that my money, the gold, is in that guy's institution. It's in a bank. The money is no longer in my house. It's not under my mattress. It's in the bank. So the bank ends up having all the money because everybody does this, right? It's the most efficient way to run an economy. And you can't blame anybody for what happened throughout history, but like that's kind of what happened, right? Is people are saying, okay, well, I don't really want to have all this liability and have all this gold sitting under my mattress. I'm gonna put it in the bank.
Yeah.
And but now everyone's walking around with pieces of paper which are really not money; they're debt, right? It's an IOU. It's saying, I promise that if you show up with this piece of paper, I'll give you, your gold back. So the money's over there. Now we're sitting on a bunch of pieces of paper that are really worth less. Worthless. Yeah. And so what happens when you extrapolate that out 50, 100 years, right, is what you're describing in history, the historical events that have kind of laid the framework for the fiat economy we have now. Because the temptation is, once the bank has the gold, I want to do something with it. Why don't I lend it out over here? Because the chances of everybody coming back and redeeming their gold all at the same time are pretty slim. So I'm going to take some risk and make a spread on lending out the money over here. And so then you have a fractional reserve bank, right? Because there's only a fraction of the gold in reserve for the people who are depositors.
Yeah.
So is that good? If you're a bank, I guess. Right? So everybody started a bank.
Yeah.
But yeah, and then even extrapolate this out a bit further, like that's assuming there's lots of banks, right? But now there's always seems to be the centralizing force where it makes sense to have the gold in the most central location to eliminate the problem with portability.
Yeah, and that's one of the greatest cons, or I don't know, greatest moves that the U.S. did, right? So yeah, as you mentioned, there were banks, and they started issuing these deposit records, which you could then trade to other people. And if you had this thing, 10 pounds of gold or a pound of gold or whatever, you could go back to that bank and get that gold out. Because, Larry gave me this thing, and here we go, right? So you had to trust that the bank would have your gold and wouldn't just run off with it. So that was part of the impetus for establishing the Fed, because banks were around long before the Fed, right? Yeah. And like you'll see, like these old notes from like the 1800s from all these different banks, right? Or from trading companies, like Hudson's Bay Trading Company. Anyways, you got the Fed. Now you move to post-World War II, where the U.S. said, okay, listen, guys, everything's kind of a mess, but you know what? Like, we're big and strong. Just give us all your gold, right? So that way if, Germany or somebody invades again, they can't steal your gold. And even, like, during the war, gold was being shipped around, and a lot of it to the States, because they were...
on a country level, right?
On a country level.
Just like individuals.
Yeah, tons and tons of gold. And the U.S. said, look, we're going to sort of take this idea of the banks and just make it worldwide. So now we're going to issue you dollars in exchange for your gold, right? And like, just trust us. We got it, right? And this is, so you got like Fort Knox,
they
right?
did have it, right? They got a big military force, and a massive economy, right?
Yep.
A lot of people.
So over time, countries were like, okay, we need some of our gold back, and that wasn't working for the U.S. because maybe they didn't have it all. Till 1971, where Nixon said, we're moving off the gold standard. And that's, what happened in 1971. Essentially, the U.S. said, okay, we're not really going to guarantee all this gold anymore with U.S. dollars. They
closed the gold window, right? Like, you used to be able to, like when the whole system of custodying. But I meant to say banks are custodians. So when the whole system of that came about for these reasons, but now I totally forget what I was going to say.
Well, you said they closed the gold window,
yeah,
right?
they closed the gold window. So now, like, you used to be able to redeem your gold, like your paper note for gold, right? And now you can't. So now you can't get the gold. And like we talked about, like, the money is the gold. Like, the gold is the money.
Yeah.
And that's over there in that guy's building. And you don't have it anymore.
Yeah.
And now you got this paper. And then they closed the gold window. And they closed that. Like, countries couldn't take their gold out of the States, but, people couldn't get gold either.
Yeah.
So, really, that doesn't change the underlying properties of money, because still, in that day when he made that decision, and forever, however many years leading up to that decision, like, money was still gold because of its properties. Like, people still valued it and wanted it for the reasons that we've kind of identified. But when he made that decision, he's using his power as, basically having a monopoly on violence, being president of the States, having a military, having force, having a policing force to say, like, no, you can't have the money. And that is essentially taking over the power of monetary policy and like producing money. And that's super interesting. I find it interesting anyways, because now you have a central organization that basically institutes monetary policy to its advantage. And that's played out over the last 50 years, right? Like, what has it been? It's been 50 years.
Yep. 52.
Yeah, 52 years. Wow. And so we've seen that happen on a global scale. We've seen it happen to our own pocketbooks, like the value of our dollars just going down, because, like you kind of touched on, right? The sinful tendency is to just print money and do it because it's profitable to you and those close to you. Maybe it's profitable to you if you're an American, but it's detrimental to other societies around the world who need, feel the effects of inflation a lot more.
Yeah. Like when other people are basing their economy on the U.S. dollar or on U.S. imports or whatever, we've seen a lot of currencies just been wiped out.
Yeah.
And where countries, emerging markets, third world countries, have had to abandon their own currency just in the last number of years because of the strength of the U.S. dollar. Everything costs more for them to buy in U.S. dollars, and they can't afford it. And eventually their systems
you can
collapsed.
think about it. We touch on scarcity. Like, you think about a civilization or like a kingdom or something like that used gold, right? They might be small, but if they save and live prudent lives and tax people according and the society functions and they accumulate gold, right? That gold's going to be there for generations, and it's only going to accumulate until somebody actually spends it all. So you can actually grow the wealth of even a small country or society in that manner. But if you did the exact same thing in fiat currency, where you don't actually control the supply of it, and it's not scarce like gold is, right? Now you end up with, maybe you're taxing the citizens, you're getting all this money and you're hoarding it, but that guy over there, he can just print it and debase it. So now there's more units of it, and all the stuff I'm holding for generations is worth nothing.
Yeah.
Right? So you're impoverishing all kinds of different nations around the world.
Yeah, and you
really
mentioned
sad.
You could have just a small group or a small but mighty force. I'm thinking of like Venice and Naples and some of these city-states that eventually produced their own coins. And you knew that if you had a ducat or, a coin from one of these city-states, that it was, the gold content was there and it was trustworthy. So it was sort of the introduction of a banking system. But, you mentioned the debasement of the currency. If a king wanted to go to war, for example, he had to raise money. He couldn't print money.
Yeah.
Because they didn't have that ability. He couldn't, unless he was like sitting on top of a gold mine, he couldn't just go mine more money. So he had to either accumulate gold for a long time so he could pay for this army, or had to get loans or give up something valuable,
just sell an asset,
land or things like that, to these bankers to do that. So now, if the U.S. needs to fund their military, they just kind of print that money, right?
They don't even have to tell anybody, or they're not accountable, right?
No.
And I get hyped up about this because the government's not accountable for their spending, right? But in reality, that trickles down to all of our lives, and we're really not living in a way that's accountable to reality, right?
Yes.
And you can see that in so many different things, because so many different aspects of society where, we just have this cult. Like, I've grown up and I've never lived under a gold standard. I don't know what it's like to have to save up money and accumulate wealth in gold before I can make a purchase. Like, I just have this sense of, well, the government just produces money and that's where it comes from, right?
Yep.
But that trickles through all different institutions and aspects of society, like education, healthcare, food quality, right? Like these all kinds of
Social
different things.
security.
Yeah, welfare systems and people's viewpoint on all of these things, right? Because if you can just produce money from nothing, and that's what society is based off of, then, well, hey, why can't we do this? Why can't we do this? Why can't we do this? And there's no sense of reality, and there's no sense of basing things off of, if you do this, you can't do that, right? There's trade-offs.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, and I have seen videos, this is typically younger folks, but like, why do I have to work? And this is like a serious, like you and me, we think it's hilarious, but this is an attitude that exists. Why should I have to work like 30 hours a week? Like, well, that's like, that's a Tuesday for me, but, why should I have to do all this hard work just to live, just to survive? Like the government should just give us all money and help, and like complete lack of basic understanding of economics and everything else. But this is
like universal basic income.
Yeah. Yeah,
and we're going all over the place.
Yeah, we're going all over here, but it has to do with sound money, right? Once you don't have a sound money, then
the attitude seeps in, right?
Yeah, and like I said, the king can't do something unless he has saved up money or he wants to give up something really valuable. Yeah. And I can't go buy a Lamborghini unless I save up my money, and I'll never save up enough to buy one. Or I give something really valuable like a kidney or something, right? So it influences your choices and your spending. But if the money is just there and the government owes it to us, then like, why do I have to work, right? That influences, why should I produce anything of value? Why should I work hard to do something for somebody else if I don't even have to work hard to do something to take care of myself?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, and you don't want to live in a society like that. So that circles back. I think that's an illusion or a delusion, that we live under, right? That it is our present reality, but it is not actually reality. Like, I think still there is, as we have identified, there is properties of sound money. There's property that make for good money, and money is such an important part of our life that, if we don't have sound money, it affects so many things.
Mm-hmm.
And since we don't, and we haven't for most of a lot of people's lifetimes, right?
Yep.
Something's gonna happen to change, because
something has to.
Yeah, because eventually, people will decide, I don't believe that this actually retains value. I'm going to store my value in this or something else, right? And that, I think you hear all the time on the news, like, lack of confidence in the banking system or lack of confidence in the government. And that's essentially what it is. It's a vote to say, look, like, you know what? I've been doing some research in history, and like this happens every so many years. And, throughout it all, like there's been properties of sound money that people have just gravitated towards, and it seems to be gold for the last like thousands of years. And if you examine the actions of like countries and central banks, like they're actually accumulating gold, right?
Some,
yeah, smart ones, right? Not Canada, I guess. I don't know. Are we smart?
We're accumulating hockey sticks and donuts.
Yeah, those are fungible.
Well, you can make donuts into Timbits.
Yeah. Oh man. So I don't know where I was going with that.
Well, I think you bring up a good point. Like, why are we talking about money? You mentioned that at the beginning, right? Like, you're focused on money, but just we're not talking about getting rich. We're just talking about the aspects of like what makes money, because we need to understand that in order to just understand the world around us and the world that we live in. Like you said, we're sort of living a lie.
Yeah,
the way that our money
living
is,
a lie.
The way that our money system is built. And there's going to be consequences for it. There are consequences just in our attitudes, our spending, our lifestyles.
Yeah.
But at
our culture.
Yeah. Right? Yeah. Especially culturally. Mm-hmm. But at some point, there's going to be a reckoning. And, this sounds like, I know it sounds like get the tinfoil hat on and conspiracy theory, but you look at any society where their money either was debased or corrupted, and I gave a few examples earlier, like that society collapses, or if it doesn't collapse, it changes very much, like just fundamentally changes, right? And, I won't say that the Roman Empire came down because of just because of their money supply. You could point to decadence as one of the main reasons,
which is also kind of a result of
that manifested in the money supply. It manifest like in their attitudes, in their culture, and then in order to have more money to fund these things,
do we not have
they
decadence
debase the
today?
currency. Well, so it's. I'll let listeners draw their own conclusions, but decadence led to this and led to an unsound money. And there are other factors, but this was like a mighty, mighty empire, the biggest the Western world has ever known.
Yeah,
and
if you live in that empire,
pretty
in
quickly.
the Roman Empire, you're probably thinking this could never come down.
Yeah.
Right? This could never come to an end. And you can't formulate a vision as to how that might happen or why.
Yeah, and you don't have the big picture either, right?
Yeah.
You're not looking at the whole, you're looking at the little spot that you live in and what's happening there. And all you know is like, I don't want these coins anymore. I'm going to just barter or something.
Yeah, and you mentioned the word reckoning. I'm like, I just had to look that up. The action or process of calculating or estimating something.
Yeah, you're not the only one who can use big words, Brent.
Yeah, I know. So, because it's a judgment, right? And the definition of the word calculating or estimating something, right? Like when you're, we're way over time, but that's okay. 2 more minutes. When you're actually calculating something, that's like a monetary discussion, right? Like you're talking about weighing monetary metal. You're talking about making a calculation when you do the math, does it check out? Right. And I think it's something that people should be aware of, the current system that we live under and how that works. And historically speaking, what has been the norm, right? And make their own conclusions and decisions as to how you manage your wealth in the present. Because we talked about before in past episodes, like we do live in the system. Like we have to interact with it and we have to deal with it. We have to pay taxes. We have to make investments. We have to make sound judgments with our money, and that is a biblical thing, and it is very prudent then to educate yourself on this stuff and to learn where we came from with money and what makes for good money and why do you want to hold certain things. And we can go into this more next time, but maybe you want to wrap it up.
Yeah, I think that's a good spot to wrap it up.
All right, folks, thank you for listening to our rambling, and we'll see you in the next episode. Thanks for listening to this episode of the Two Stewards Show. If you like my voice better, click subscribe.
And if you like my voice better, click share.
If you like both, give us a 5-star rating.
To interact with the show, feel free to reach out at hello@twostewards.ca.
We'll see you in the next episode. In the meantime, steward your wealth wisely.